Guitar players, you're officially on notice. We're coming for you. Going to learn how to cut through the mix, use EQ, and crush our 6-string counterparts. Metal Bass Monday. All right, this week's orders of business. First up, started a Facebook group. So I'm going to put the link down below, but there is the Metal Bass Mosh Pit. I thought it'd be a cool idea just to have a place where all of us could talk on, whatever subjects and be able to do it in real time or free time or whatever. Have a bit more of an open forum, and so that everybody, even when I'm not around, can get together and talk things, and it'll help me get some opinions together and stuff like that too. So please join me over there. I'll look forward to seeing you. Next up on that is my thankfulness to the community. I definitely want to say it. I'm coming up on just about 1,000 new subscribers in a very short amount of time, mostly due to a video I did about YouTube and things. And I just want to really say thanks, and on a number of different levels. Thanks for the subscriptions. Thanks for the amazing input I get from you. And this week, I learned how important the community can be and how much you guys are willing to give back, and it's fantastic. Thank you very much to Wansiba. I was looking for some reference tracks that I have been looking for all over the web, trying to get some reference points for an upcoming project that I'm doing, and could not find them. I posted it on Facebook, and in almost no time, I got a private message, and our friend here sent them on to me, hooked me up right away, and that's fantastic that there's that community and that willingness to share and give back and exchange things. And that's what really got me to think about putting together the Facebook group, so that you could all do that for each other. And again, thank you so much. It's come really in handy, and it's going to benefit the channel, because the project I'm doing is going to end up part being some of the engineering lessons. So, much appreciated. And on another one, as some of you know, I also play guitar. Yes, I step into the devil's pool once in a while. And I have this thing about always customizing my gear and making things really individual. I always have to mod things out. It's just what I do. And you can probably see behind me my faceplate for, it's a Laney GH50, which I absolutely love and snarls like crazy. But that awesome piece back there was done by my good friend Christina at Clear Cut Method. Link here and link below. If you want any kind of laser etching, if you want to copy my idea, or you want any other kind of stuff done, I recommend her. She's awesome. And just look at the job she did. Check it out. Ooh, pretty colors. He didn't just change the color. Strobing? Really? That's just too far over the top. She did a fantastic job on it, turned it around in a matter of days. So, many thanks to Christina. Check her out. Instagram link below so you can see her other work and get in touch with her if you need any stuff like this or any other merch ideas you have. She's an artist too, so she can help you out on getting your designs together. Now, with that stuff out, the last thing I want to say is, I try and get with every comment that seems to need a reply, or at least acknowledge that you guys are reaching out, because again, I always appreciate it. One of the videos that I did last week went absolutely nuts with comments, like over 1,000 comments. I just started getting flooded with them, and it was hard to keep up. And it also comes through, the way YouTube sends it to you is just in this stream of notifications. If you said something or commented on something and I didn't get back to you, and you were actually asking me a question especially, or if you were saying something particularly kind and I should at least acknowledge it and be thankful, please hit me up below, either link to your comment or just restate it or something if I missed you. I definitely try and get to everybody, and if I didn't get to you this time, it's not a slight. I wasn't ignoring you. It's just overwhelming. And the other part is that if I've already answered you and you come back with another reply, I don't get a notification. It's stupid. I literally have to search through the entire comment thing and go back on a regular basis and just check in and go, have people replied to me, and I'll find a comment from like a week before. I'm not being rude. I'm not ignoring. I'm always happy to talk and I enjoy it. Just letting you know, if I missed you, it wasn't intentional. Please let me know. I'm always happy to chat. All you guys are amazing. So with that said, let's get to learning how to step on them guitars. Okay, so we got our tracks loaded up. Let's first see what we're dealing with, and let's check out the bass track by itself. Well, actually, along with the drums, so we can hear its tonal character outside of the mix. Okay? Get these muted. Okay, so we got a fairly warm, driven sound. It's pretty throaty, a little bit of tang on the upper end, in the upper mids to give it a bit of clarity, but good and thick sounding. So now let's hear what happens when we put the guitars over it immediately and see if it sounds different than what it sounds like when it's just soloed or by itself. Let's actually start from the same section. Okay, so the first thing that you should probably notice is that springy upper mid sound is cutting through a lot, and it seems to be more emphasized now. The reason for that is that the guitars aren't EQ'd to take advantage of that part of the spectrum quite as much, so it sounds more pronounced because the guitars are masking certain sections by having EQ and content in the same area, so the one place they aren't, that really springy upper mid is kind of got a clear path right to your ears. The other part is that it doesn't sound quite as deep. It sounded like it had a really good chunk when it was soloed, but now you're missing where the difference between the guitar and bass bottom end is. And that's because this guitar track was done with some greenback speakers, which have some pretty thick low-mid content, so that's laying over top of our bass sound. So that gives you a clue right there that any place that there's equal content between bass and guitar, the guitar is going to win out, and it's going to change the overall aspect. So again, that low-mid section is getting pulled down. The real bite on the top is getting pulled down, but what you're hearing the most is that really springy upper mid because there's no competition. So that's how the bass sound is going to be heard. So let's hear it again. I'm going to start with soloed bass and then drop the guitar in. See again how you can hear right away that the really deep lows just kind of get masked out and they just become part of the wall of sound. So that's kind of making the point right there, is you can hear immediately when the guitars start going in that the aspect of the bass changes. Now what we're going to do is make some changes just to the guitars and see what happens and how not only does it change how audible the bass is, but how the bass actually comes across. Now, on this guitar track, it's a little bit scooped, meaning that the center mids around 500 hertz have been dug out a little bit. To compensate for that, when I did the bass track, I actually boosted the mids, and that's why it sounds so thick and kind of warm, is the center mids are very much present. I don't usually push a lot in that area, but to make it fit this mix, I did add that. So without touching the bass, let's turn some EQ on the guitars and make some changes and see what winds up happening when we push that area. So we're going to add 500 hertz and the surrounding area back into the guitars and see what winds up happening to how the bass is perceived as we do it. So let's check it out. So notice now that the bass is starting to get crowded out, that the only thing it's holding on to is that springy upper area, that the guitar has started kind of just masking over all of the really powerful parts of the bass. And the only thing you're really hanging on to at that point is that piece of upper mid cut that you've got. As far as 500 hertz and 200 and places where it would normally add girth, it's getting masked out. So now let's go back and we're going to try the same thing, but I'm going to start scooping it out in the opposite direction and take even more 500 out of the guitar and see what that does to the bass sound. Hey, you see what happened there? The springiness is keeping that upper end going. That upper mid area is still cutting through nice and clear. But by scooping out the 500, the bass suddenly becomes much deeper sounding. And it has a much more kind of ominous presence in the mix. That's because you're taking room away in an area that the bass is actually pushing forward. So now that there's absolutely zero competition, the bass is just owning that range. So you see already how its EQ changes in the other instruments and learning to work with them, that's making the perceptibility of the bass in the mix change rather than just slamming volume. Volume will not work and creates garbage, live and in the studio. You have to look at things like those puzzle pieces going together and cut holes in one to create an opening for the other, but you have to be careful about it because, again, it can be really strange how an aspect that when you hear all the frequencies of an instrument together sound like they work together, if you only leave a hole for a certain area, all of a sudden that instrument sounds really pronounced in that range and it may make it sound weak or weird or something like that. So let's do one more experiment and check out, say, the chorus and see how enhancing the 500s again, how much it can do to the bass's lack of perception. And then we're going to make some EQ changes in the bass and show how to find a place to cut through. So let's check this out some more. Okay, check this out right here. See, the bass is almost disappeared into the mix. It's if you could hear the guitar soloed, you'd realize that you're hearing bass under it, but the intelligibility of the notes and really hearing it as a separate instrument is gone. Because now that you've moved into chord work and there's more mid-range going on, plus you boosted the 500 area where the bass is spending most of the body of its tone cutting through, the guitar is just wrecking it and it's just stepping all over it. So again, you see how, trying to work around someone just volume-wise isn't going to work. Just a small change in EQ, well, this is a rather large one, but just one adjustment in EQ can make all the difference in two competing instruments. So let's hear a little bit more of it. So it's only when the guitars are kind of transitioning and the bass is really getting, some fretboard clack and stuff that you really hear it cut through. So that's how important this can be as far as understanding where the guitar is and how it's being enhanced. Because if you don't understand how the guitar is being shaped, you don't know where to get your opening. So let's try some ideas with how to get the bass to cut through and how to use EQ on it to find that hole and find those puzzle pieces. Okay, so what we're going to do is take a couple of EQs here, and I'm going to do a sweep, basically, is I'm going to enhance an area and just start moving it around while I'm listening to hear suddenly something that will poke through. And it'll become really noticeable, and that'll tell you that that's an area where the bass can cut that the guitar is leaving open. So let's check this out. Let's start with it out. So right there, we're working at about 1.3K. I find that's a really useful area for bass to cut through in between 1 to 2K. That 1.5, 1.7 area especially, it tends to be an open place where bass can really dominate and you hear it immediately. That the gurgle and the grind starts really cutting through the mix. So just enhancing that frequency, let's hear it with and without. Pretty big difference, right? Again, it's cutting through, it's almost stepping on the guitars at this point. And that was an EQ change. It's not a volume change. And this does apply live, same as in the studio. Find the way to, we kind of have to be like the ninjas of the band, that you don't step on the kick drums area with your low end, and you need to get that sorted. And then you need to learn how to cut through the guitars while also creating support in the mix. So finding those holes, it's almost like combat. You find the places where the enemy forgot to protect, and that's where you go get them. So let's slide this around and see what happens as we do it. Okay, so now we have a really clangy kind of almost getting into a brighter high gain type of sound. And that's giving it more of a metallic upper range. So again, there's a little hole that you can fit into, but you have to kind of pick which character do you want. Do you want more of a gurgle and a grind and stuff? Then that's where we were at about 1.3. If you want this at, say, 2.3, and get more metallic, then that's what you're going to do to kind of sit almost on top of the guitars. You're giving it this metallic ringing sound over top of things. And that's going to apply to things like, you're running into the turf where like Dee Dee Verney might be, or the modern clank kind of players. And when you back down to about 1.3 and you get a little bit more grunt, that's going to be more where maybe like Frank Bello from Anthrax's newer work, things like that, he's gotten a little chunkier, where a tone like that might be. And you start learning as you go along what frequencies and what areas get you what tones, and how that'll affect the sound in the overall mix. Now what we want to do, though, is go back and listen to the soloed bass track and drums and hear how it's changed the aspect of how the bass sounds by itself, and it may be surprising. Without. See there, listening to it on its own, it's almost annoying. And I made this point in another Metal Bass Monday, in one of the other production things, is that your bass in the mix probably isn't going to be your ideal solo sound. And that's why I think it's more important for bassists that are going to be prominent in a mix or do a lot of work where you're going to get bass breaks and things to have a solo sound and an in the mix sound, because this one is designed to cut through, and the irony is to get it to sound closer to what it does soloed and to cut through the same way, you have to make it sound not like itself. It's a weird paradox, but that's what we're trying to figure out here, is how to get something to cut through a mix so that it has the same level of presence it has when there aren't competing instruments. So let's try a little more here. I kind of like that sound. It's got a bit more grit to it. There's some real nastiness in there and everything. So let's go through and check that out back and forth with guitars on and off. And actually, let's just turn the EQ on and off with the guitars going and hear the difference in perceptibility, how the tone sounds cutting through the mix, and what it does volume-wise, and how it seems to hit the ear by turning that EQ on and off on the bass. Start with it off. So you can hear immediately that the bass seems more buried when I take the EQ off, and it also becomes more of a warm, supportive instrument, whereas when I turn the EQ back on, all of a sudden this upper cut makes the overall aggression of the instrument sound different in the mix, and not quite how it sounds by itself. Now it's starting to sound like more of an upper end instrument because still so much of the low end is getting masked by the low mids of the guitar. So let's go back to an earlier part and hear just a little more. And now just to drive the point home a little bit more, let's go back to the guitars and put that 500 EQ back in, drop that down even more, and see what it does with EQ on both instruments. So now you can hear just by taking a little bit of EQ out of the center mids and guitar and adding a little bit of upper mid EQ in the bass is now destroying guitar, which was the opposite problem before. We were trying to find a hole to fit through, and it was becoming difficult, so we added that 3K kind of boost. Now that we've got some dug out mids in the guitars, now the guitars sound weak comparatively to the bass. So it can go either way. You have to either work with the guitar player and get those cuts made in, or add some to yourself in places that they're leaving open, or the ideal situation is you both work together to get those pieces. But this shows you I haven't touched any volume here, but I've made drastic differences in the overall perceived volume of the guitars and the bass in this mix just by changing EQ. And that's going to be the crucial thing, not having volume wars. Two incompatible sounds just done loud aren't going to make a difference. EQs that fit together and people sharing a balance of power when it comes to the weight of the mix is where you're really going to be able to get everybody to cut through and create a unified wall of sound instead of just two instruments desperately trying to take up the same space. So to close out, let's check this out one more time, and I'm going to turn the EQs on and off one round. Okay, so what I'm also going to start doing with these lessons is I'm going to cut them up and make separate videos with them outside of Metal Bass Monday, labeled as the lessons, so that if you guys want to go back and review them or things, you can find them by subject quicker. And if there's other topics inside of Metal Bass Monday that you kind of want to zip right to this subject, you can just go to the other video and have it right there. So look out for that. If you want to review this stuff and go over it, I'm going to have a separate this as a separate video up there. But yeah, thanks so much. The subscriber count's coming up. It's been absolutely fantastic. Hope to see you over at Metal Bass Mosh Pit on Facebook. And that's going to do it for this week. Like, share, and subscribe, please. It genuinely helps out. And I'll see you next time.